I knew how the night would end before it even started, because her whole body had learned the move. She would finish whatever she was doing on her phone, set it face down like she was closing a door, roll toward the wall, and speak in that soft voice that sounded kind but always landed like dismissal. Maybe tomorrow, she'd say, as if tomorrow was a real place we were both traveling to, as if it wasn't just a word she used to buy silence. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, counting the rotations like a man trying to hypnotize himself into not needing anything, into not wanting the warmth of his wife's skin, into not missing the old version of us that used to laugh at nothing and touch without negotiating at first. It wasn't even about sex anymore, not really, because once you've been told maybe tomorrow enough times, what you start craving is proof that your presence matters, that you are not an obligation someone resents, that you are still a person your partner chooses when the world is finally quiet. "Are you okay?" I asked, knowing the question was ridiculous because if she was okay, I wouldn't be asking, and if she wasn't okay, she wouldn't tell me at midnight in the dark. She sighed into her pillow, and I heard the tiredness in it, but I also heard the impatience that came with being asked to care. "I'm just exhausted, Jake. Work has been insane. Please don't." That "please don't" was the real sentence. It meant don't bring it up, don't ask, don't make me feel guilty, don't remind me that we're drifting. So I did what I'd trained myself to do. I swallowed it, rolled onto my back, and let my own feelings sit there like a dog you forgot to feed. I whispered, "Yeah, okay," and she was asleep within minutes, her breathing steady and distant, like she was sleeping alone in a room that only happened to contain me. I got up because lying there made me feel like a prop. The hallway was colder than the bedroom, and the quiet downstairs felt sharper, like the house itself was holding its breath. I poured water and stood at the sink, staring out into a backyard that looked calm and clean, as if nothing inside this house was rotting. That was when I heard bare feet on wood, careful steps that weren't hers, because my wife moved like a person who belonged, and these footsteps moved like someone trying not to be noticed. Lena stood in the doorway, hair messy, wearing an old sweatshirt that used to be my wife's. She didn't try to smile, didn't try to act casual. She just looked at me in a way that made my chest tighten, because it wasn't the look of someone passing through. It was the look of someone who had been paying attention. "Another maybe tomorrow?" she asked quietly. I should have shut it down right there. I should have said, "Go back to bed," and kept the boundaries intact. Instead, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for months. "You heard that." "The walls are thin," she said, then hesitated, like she was measuring the risk of her next words. "And I notice things." I stared at the glass in my hand. "It's not your problem." "I know," she said, stepping in just a little. "I'm not trying to meddle. I just hate seeing you look like someone who's being erased." I laughed once, short and bitter, because it was easier than admitting it hurt. "I'm fine." Lena shook her head slowly. "No, you're not. You're just quiet." The air between us held too much. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. And recognition can be dangerous when you've been starving for it. I felt my throat tighten and looked away, as if the backyard had answers. "It's late," I said, choosing the safest sentence I could find. "It is," she agreed, and for a second, neither of us moved, and I hated how warm it felt to have someone stand there and not treat me like a nuisance. Then she stepped back, giving me space like she understood I was one bad decision away from ruining everything. "Good night, Jake," she murmured. "Good night," I answered. And when she disappeared down the hall, I realized my hands were shaking. Not because I wanted her, not exactly, but because her words had named the thing I'd been refusing to say out loud. My marriage wasn't stuck in a rough patch. It was becoming a place where I didn't exist. The next day didn't bring clarity. It brought routine. And routine is how people stay in unhappy lives without screaming. My wife moved through the morning like I was furniture. Coffee, shower, phone, keys, the quick check of her reflection in the hallway mirror, then the door closing behind her with that final, careless sound. When she used to leave, she'd kiss my cheek, even if she was running late, even if she was annoyed at traffic. Now she didn't even look in my direction long enough to remember I had a face. "You working late again?" I asked, because the question felt like a rope I could throw across the distance between us. "Probably," she said, already halfway out, like the conversation was a hurdle. "Don't wait up." Then she was gone, and the house felt larger, emptier, like the walls had expanded now that she wasn't inside them. I sat at the table, stared at my phone, and realized I couldn't remember the last time she'd asked how I was doing without it being a formality. Lena came down later, hair still damp from a shower, holding her sleeves like she was cold. She paused when she saw me, like she didn't know whether she was allowed to exist in this space with me now that she'd said something the night before. "She didn't even say goodbye," Lena said softly, as if she was commenting on the weather but really pointing to the wound. I shrugged, but the shrug was a lie. "She's busy." Lena's eyes flicked up to mine. "Busy is one thing. Distant is another." I didn't answer because she was right, and I was exhausted from defending someone who hadn't defended us in a long time. Lena filled the kettle, moved around the kitchen with this quiet competence that made me notice how little my wife did in this house anymore besides exist inside it. "You don't have to tell me anything," Lena said finally. "But does she ever talk to you? Like really talk?" I laughed under my breath. "We talk about groceries, bills, schedules. Sometimes we argue about the trash. That count?" Lena's mouth tightened. "That's not a marriage. That's a calendar." Her bluntness landed hard. I should have been irritated, but instead I felt relief, because she wasn't asking me to pretend. She wasn't smoothing it over. She wasn't offering maybe tomorrow. She was naming it. And once something is named, it becomes real. That night my wife came home later than usual, took one look at me on the couch and said, "Long day," like it was a shield she could hold up to stop any questions from reaching her. She went upstairs without waiting for an answer. No, "How are you?" No, "Did you eat?" No, "Want to watch something?" Just the sound of her footsteps fading and the familiar loneliness settling back onto my shoulders like a heavy coat. Lena was in the living room with a book, but she wasn't reading. I could tell because she wasn't turning pages. "You're going to break," she said quietly. I stared at the blank TV screen. "I'm not breaking." "You're cracking," she corrected, voice gentle. "There's a difference." I swallowed. "What do you want me to do, Lena? Force her to want me?" Lena's eyes softened in a way that made my stomach twist. "No. I want you to stop acting like you're asking for something unreasonable." I looked at her then. Really looked. Her face wasn't playful. It wasn't flirtatious. It was angry, almost, but not at me, at the unfairness of it. "You're not hard to love," she said, and it came out like a statement of fact, like she couldn't believe anyone had made me doubt it. Something in me flinched at the tenderness. "Don't," I muttered. "Don't what?" she asked. "Don't say things like that," I said, because I could feel how easily I could start living off her words, how easily I could start leaning toward the only warmth left in this house. Lena held my gaze, then looked away first, like she understood the danger. "Okay," she said quietly. "I won't." But the silence after that felt different, less empty, more loaded, like we'd both stepped onto thin ice and were pretending we hadn't heard it creak. By the third night, I could predict everything, the way my wife would sigh before bed, the exact moment she'd turn away, the familiar phrase delivered like a bedtime story for adults who don't touch anymore. "Maybe tomorrow." And what scared me most wasn't the phrase itself. It was how numb I'd become to it. I wasn't even surprised. I wasn't even angry. I was just emptied out. I went downstairs without a word, because there was no point in speaking into a room where my voice bounced back unchanged. The kitchen was dark except for the dim light over the stove. I stood there with my hands on the counter, breathing slow, trying to settle something in my chest that wouldn't settle. Footsteps came behind me again. Lena, of course. She didn't enter right away. She lingered in the doorway like she was asking permission from the air. You couldn't sleep. It wasn't a question. I didn't turn. No. She stepped in, slow, keeping a respectful distance. She said it again. I exhaled, then surprised myself by laughing. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief at how predictable my life had become. Yeah. Lena's voice softened. How long has it been like this? I hesitated, because saying the number would make it real in a way my mind had been avoiding. Long enough that I stopped counting, I admitted. Silence pooled between us. Then Lena said, almost to herself, "That's cruel." I turned then, because the word hit me. "She's not cruel," I said automatically, the old reflex to defend my wife even when she wasn't defending us. Lena's eyes lifted to mine. Maybe she doesn't mean to be, but impact is still impact. I stared at her, something tight in my throat. You shouldn't be in the middle of this. I'm not trying to be, she said quickly. I keep watching you shrink. I swallowed. I'm fine. Lena shook her head, and this time she didn't look like a younger sister with opinions. She looked like someone who had been through her own kind of neglect and recognized the bruises. You're not fine, she said. You're surviving. The word lodged in my chest. Surviving. Like this was something to endure, not a life to live. I looked away again, because the truth felt too exposed. I don't want to hate her, I whispered. I don't want to become bitter. Lena's voice dropped even lower. Then stop accepting scraps. I turned toward her, a flash of irritation rising. What are you even saying? She took a breath, like she was about to step onto dangerous ground and couldn't decide if it was worth it. Then she said it anyway, soft but clear. Every night it's maybe tomorrow. My stomach tightened, because I knew what was coming, and I hated that part of me wanted to hear it. Lena's eyes held mine, and there was a small, sad smile on her mouth. Not playful, not teasing, more like she was mourning something. Why wait? She whispered. The kitchen went still. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, my wife shifted in her sleep, oblivious to the fact that the foundation of her marriage was trembling. I felt the line in the room as clearly as if someone had drawn it in chalk between my feet and Lena's. This side was loneliness and vows and quiet resentment. That side was attention and temptation and consequences I couldn't even fully imagine yet. I didn't step over it, not physically, but something inside me leaned, and that was frightening enough. Lena, I said, my voice rough. Don't. She didn't move closer. She didn't touch me. That restraint made it worse because it meant she wasn't trying to lure me. She was just offering the truth of her presence. I'm not asking you to do anything, she said gently. I'm asking you to stop pretending you're not hurting. I stared at her, heart pounding. If you keep talking like this... I know, she whispered, and her eyes glistened like she was fighting her own emotions too. I know exactly what this could become. The air between us held something heavy and electric, and it wasn't sex. Not yet. Not explicitly. It was the ache of being seen, the danger of being seen by the wrong person at the wrong time. I stepped back, because I had to. Go to bed, I said, and my voice sounded harsher than I meant it. Lena nodded, swallowing. Okay. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway without looking back. You don't deserve to beg for love, she said quietly, and then she was gone. I stood alone in the dark kitchen, feeling the aftermath like a tremor in my hands, because the most terrifying part wasn't what she'd suggested. It was that, for the first time in a long time, I could imagine a life where tomorrow wasn't the answer to everything. The next few days were a careful kind of hell, because nothing technically happened, and yet everything felt different. My wife still said, maybe tomorrow, like it was a harmless habit, still moved around me like I was furniture she'd learned to live with, still sighed when I tried to talk like my words were one more task on her list. But now I had Lena's voice in my head, not as temptation, not as a plan, but as a mirror. You're shrinking. Once you see yourself shrinking, you can't unsee it, and every quiet dismissal starts to feel less like a phase and more like a verdict. Lena kept her distance after that night in the kitchen. She wasn't avoiding me in a dramatic way, not slamming doors or hiding, but she moved through the house like someone walking on thin ice. If we were in the same room, she kept conversation light. If my wife entered, Lena folded back into her sister role, cheerful enough, normal enough, like she was trying to scrub the air clean of anything charged. I appreciated the restraint, and it also made my stomach twist, because it proved she understood the danger as clearly as I did. One evening, my wife came home with that glazed, exhausted look she'd been wearing for months, the one that made her seem far away, even when she was right in front of me. She dropped her bag by the stairs and said, "I'm starving," like it was the first thing she'd said to me all day that wasn't logistics or irritation. I took the bait, because I always did. "I can make pasta," I offered. "Or we can order." She shrugged without looking at me. Whatever. I cooked anyway, because cooking is something I can control, and control feels like safety when your emotional life is sliding out from under you. I put a plate in front of her. She ate while scrolling. I watched the glow of her phone reflect in her eyes and felt that old, familiar ache tighten my chest. Halfway through dinner, I tried again. "Can we talk for a minute?" She didn't look up. "About what?" "About us," I said, keeping my voice steady. "About whatever this is." She finally lifted her gaze, and it wasn't warmth I saw. It was fatigue. "Jake, not tonight." There it was again, dressed in different clothes. I stared at her. "Do you realize you say that every time I try?" She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "Because every time you try, it turns into a whole thing." "It's already a whole thing," I said. "We just pretend it isn't." Her jaw tightened. "I don't have the energy for this. I'm tired. I have work in the morning." "So do I said, sharper than I meant. She froze, and for a second I saw something flicker. Annoyance, maybe guilt, maybe both. "What do you want from me?" she asked, finally putting the phone down. I took a slow breath. "I want you to look at me like I matter." That landed, because it was too honest to dismiss easily. She looked away first. "I do look at you." "No," I said quietly. "You look through me." Silence sat on the table between us. A fork clinked against ceramic. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked, and I knew Lena was nearby, moving carefully, listening without meaning to. My wife's voice got colder. "Is this because Lena's here?" My throat tightened. "Why would it be?" "Because you've been different," she said. "You're suddenly moody. You're suddenly bringing everything up. You're suddenly acting like I'm ruining your life." "I'm acting like I'm lonely," I corrected. "Because I am." She exhaled, frustration curling around every word. "I can't fix your loneliness for you." I stared at her like she'd slapped me. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to stop being the reason for it." Her eyes flashed. "Wow." "Yeah," I said, voice low. "Wow." She stood abruptly, chair scraping. "I'm going to bed." She walked away before I could say anything else, before I could soften it, before I could apologize for telling the truth too directly. The stairs creaked under her heels. The bedroom door clicked shut, not slammed, just closed, like a decision. I sat at the table staring at the half-eaten pasta, feeling that familiar blend of anger and grief, and then I heard soft footsteps behind me. Lena didn't come into the kitchen fully. She hovered in the doorway like she wasn't sure she should exist there. "You tried," she said quietly. I didn't turn. And it didn't matter. Lena's voice was gentle, almost pained. "It matters. Just not to the person it should." I finally looked at her, and something in my face must have given me away, because her expression softened like she wanted to reach out and couldn't. "Don't," I said. not unkindly, but firm. Don't make this harder. Lena nodded once, swallowing. I won't. But when she walked away, the air she left behind still felt warm, and I hated myself for how much I noticed. That night my wife said nothing in bed. No, good night. No, sorry. Just her back to me, the same distance, the same wall. I lay there awake, staring into the dark, realizing that my boundary with Lena wasn't the only boundary in this house. The bigger one was the invisible line my wife had drawn between us, and how long I'd been pretending it wasn't there. The breaking point didn't come with shouting. It came with a quiet moment so ordinary it almost fooled me into missing it, until I felt something inside me go still, like a switch flipping off. It was a Saturday morning. No work excuses, no looming deadlines, just sunlight through the blinds and the sound of my wife's coffee machine whirring like a normal home. I walked into the kitchen and saw my wife at the counter, phone in hand, coffee steaming beside her. I stood there waiting for her to look up, to say good morning, to offer me anything that felt like partnership. She didn't. She scrolled. She sipped. She existed in her own orbit. Morning, I said. She hummed without looking. That was it. That tiny dismissive sound. The way she didn't even bother shaping my name anymore. Something in me just cooled. Like my body finally accepted what my mind had been bargaining against. Lena came in a minute later, hair tied up, wearing sweats, and she paused when she felt the tension. Her eyes flicked between us. She didn't speak, but her presence sharpened everything, like a spotlight revealing the cracks. My wife finally looked up, only because she noticed Lena. Hey, she said to her sister, warmer than she'd been to me in days. Lena gave a small smile. Hey. My wife took another sip of coffee. So, what are you doing today? Lena blinked, surprised. I don't know. Maybe go for a walk. My wife nodded like she cared. Then she glanced at me, finally acknowledging I existed. You taking care of the yard today? Not, how are you? Not, want to do something together. Yard, task, utility. I stared at her for a long beat. Is that what I am now? I asked quietly. A list of chores? Her eyebrows rose. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you can ask your sister about her day with a normal tone, but you can't even look at me like I'm your husband, I said, and my voice was calm, which scared me more than yelling ever could. Lena shifted uncomfortably. I can go. No, my wife snapped, then softened it quickly. No, stay. Jake's just doing this again. Doing what? I asked. Turning nothing into a crisis, she said. And that was the moment. The exact moment. Because it wasn't that she didn't understand. It was that she didn't want to. She wanted the comfort of my presence without the responsibility of caring about it. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. She frowned. Okay? Yeah, I repeated, still calm. Okay. Then I'll say it plainly, and you can't call it a crisis. I'm not happy. I'm lonely. I don't feel loved, and I don't think you want to fix it. My wife opened her mouth, then closed it. That's not fair. Tell me what part is wrong, I said. She looked away, jaw tight. I'm tired of being made the villain. I laughed softly, and there was no joy in it. I'm tired of being invisible. Silence fell. Lena stood still like she didn't know where to put her hands. My wife's face hardened. So what? You're leaving? I stared at her, and the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel the usual panic about losing her. I just felt clarity. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know I can't keep living like this. My wife's eyes flashed, and she said the thing I think she'd been holding back for months. Maybe you're just not enough for me anymore. Lena inhaled sharply. My chest tightened, but the pain was clean, not messy, like finally ripping off a bandage that's been stuck too long. Okay, I said again, voice steady. Then we should stop pretending. My wife stared at me like she didn't recognize me. What are you saying? I'm saying we need help or we need to separate, I said, because I can't spend another year waiting for tomorrow while you live like you're single with a roommate who pays half the bills. Lena stepped back, eyes wide, and I saw the guilt flicker across her face, like she thought she'd caused this confrontation by simply existing near it. My wife's hands tightened around her coffee mug. This is unbelievable. No, I said quietly. This is overdue. She stood abruptly and walked out, not upstairs this time, but toward the garage, keys snatched off the counter. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass in the cabinet. A second later, the car started, backed out, and disappeared. The house fell silent. Lena stared at the empty doorway, then looked at me with something like sorrow. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shook my head. Don't be. If anything, you just made it impossible for me to keep lying to myself. She swallowed, tears bright in her eyes. And now what? I stared at the counter where my wife's coffee still steamed, abandoned mid-sip. Now, I said slowly, we deal with what's real. My wife didn't come back until late afternoon. No text, no call. Just the sound of her car in the driveway and her footsteps inside the house like she was bracing for a fight she didn't want but couldn't avoid. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked composed in the way people do when they've spent hours rehearsing their anger so it won't crack into sadness. She didn't look at me. She looked at Lena. Can you give us a minute? My wife asked, voice clipped. Lena hesitated. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. Yeah, she said quietly, and left the room with careful steps, like she was trying not to make noise in a house full of fragile things. The moment Lena disappeared, my wife's composure slipped just enough for me to see the emotion underneath it. Not heartbreak, not tenderness. Something like humiliation. You said separate, she started, like repeating the word made it more offensive. I said help or separate, I corrected. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to stop pretending. She scoffed. So you're giving me an ultimatum. I'm giving you honesty, I said. You've had my silence for months. It didn't help. My wife stared at the floor, then lifted her gaze sharply. Is there someone else? The question landed with weight. I could have lied. I could have taken the easy path and said no, because technically, nothing had happened that I couldn't explain away. No affair, no physical betrayal, just late-night conversations, charged silences, a dangerous closeness I hadn't shut down fast enough. But lying was how we got here. I took a slow breath. No, I said carefully. Not like that. But there's been moments where I've felt seen by someone else, and that scared me. My wife's eyes narrowed. By who? I hesitated, and in that hesitation I watched the truth assemble itself on her face like a storm forming. Her lips parted. No, she whispered. Don't tell me. Emily, I said, using her name for the first time in a while. Nothing happened, but it's complicated. Her face hardened. It's Lena. I didn't answer fast enough, and that was answer enough. She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like pain trying to disguise itself. Of course it is. Emily, I started, stepping closer. She held up a hand. Don't come near me. I didn't plan this, I said, voice tight. I didn't want... You didn't want what? She snapped. To notice my sister? To enjoy her attention? To feel wanted? Is that what you're saying? I swallowed. I'm saying I've been lonely. And she was kind. My wife's eyes flashed. So now I'm the villain and she's the saint. No, I said firmly. I'm saying we broke long before she came here. My wife shook her head, anger rising. You're blaming me. I'm naming what happened, I corrected. You checked out. You stopped trying. You stopped touching me like I was your husband. And I begged with my silence for months, hoping you'd come back. You didn't. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked it away. I didn't know how, she whispered, and for the first time her voice sounded young and scared. I held still. Then we get help. She laughed again, but it was empty. Help. Like therapy fixes the fact that you want my sister. I don't want... I started, then stopped, because the truth was more complicated than a clean denial. I didn't want to destroy my life, but I also didn't want to go back to the numbness. My wife's jaw tightened. I can't even look at her right now, she said, and I can't look at you without feeling disgusting. That word cut. I never wanted you to feel disgusting, I said quietly. She stared at me and her voice dropped. I think we should separate. The room went cold. I nodded slowly because if I argued, it would be for comfort, not for love. Okay, she flinched. That's it? Okay? I'm not going to beg you to stay in something you don't want, I said. And even as I said it, I felt the grief move through me, clean, heavy, real. She swallowed hard. I'm staying with Rachel for a while, she said. We'll figure out logistics later. I nodded again. She turned, and for a second it looked like she might say something else, something softer, something human. But then she straightened her shoulders and walked out of the kitchen like a person leaving a job she hated. When she passed Lena in the hallway, I heard my wife's voice slice through the air. Don't talk to me. Lena's reply was barely audible. I don't, my wife repeated, and then the front door opened and closed. Car, engine, driveway, gone. Lena stood in the hallway like she'd been punched. When she looked at me, her eyes were wet. I didn't want this, she whispered. I know, I said, and my voice broke slightly. But it happened anyway. She took a shaky breath. I should leave. The words hit like a second loss. I stepped forward, then stopped myself, because the last thing I should do was reach for her in this wreckage. You don't have to run, I said quietly. Yes, she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. I do, because if I stay, I'll keep being the spark, and you'll keep being the fire, and she'll never forgive either of us. I didn't argue, because deep down I knew she was right. Lena wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, then gave me a look that was equal parts apology and longing. I'm sorry, she whispered again. Me too, I said, and it was the most honest thing left in the house. The first night after Emily left, I kept waiting for a sound that never came. No heels, no cabinet doors, no bathroom drawer opening and closing like punctuation. The house didn't feel peaceful. It felt exposed, like someone had pulled insulation out of the walls and left everything thin and raw. I walked from room to room without meaning to, touching familiar objects the way you touch a bruise to confirm it's real. Her mug was still in the cabinet. Her shampoo still sat in the shower. A sweater of hers hung on the coat hook by the door like it expected her to come back and slip into it. Lena stayed shut in the guest room most of that day. I didn't blame her. I didn't knock. I didn't text. I didn't want to become the reason she stayed, because I knew how quickly comfort can turn into dependency when you're drowning. Instead, I tried to do ordinary things. I answered emails. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. I swept the kitchen floor twice. I kept my hands busy because if my hands stopped, my mind would catch up. Late afternoon, the guest room door finally opened. Lena stepped out slowly, like she was entering a room where something dangerous might still be alive. Her eyes were puffy, cheeks pale, hair tied back too tight as if she'd tried to make herself smaller. She's really gone, she said, voice barely above a whisper. For now, I answered. Lena nodded, staring at the floor. She hates me. I swallowed. She's hurt. That's a nicer word, Lena muttered, and the bitterness in her voice wasn't aimed at Emily. It was aimed at herself. We sat at the kitchen table without eating, without pretending the conversation was casual. Lena kept rubbing her thumb over the edge of her sleeve like she was sanding down a panic she couldn't name. I'm leaving, she said suddenly. My chest tightened. Tonight? As soon as I find somewhere, she said. I can stay with Tessa for a bit. She's got a spare room. I wanted to say, don't go. I wanted to say I can't handle this house getting any emptier, but the words sat in my throat like stones, because I knew what it would mean if I begged. I knew what it would mean if I made her stay. You don't have to disappear, I said quietly. Lena's eyes lifted to mine. Yes, I do. Because if I stay, I'm not just the reason she's gone. I'm the reason you'll stop feeling the consequences. That stung because it was true. She was the only warmth left in this place, and warmth is intoxicating when you've been cold for years. I don't want you to think I used you, I said, the sentence tasting awful as soon as it left my mouth. Lena flinched like I'd slapped her. I don't think that, she said quickly. I think we were two people starving in a kitchen full of food neither of us could eat. Her metaphor hit too hard. I stared at the table, jaw clenched. You're not a bad man, Jake, she said softly. You just kept waiting for permission to be loved. I looked up, and my voice came out rough. And you? Lena let out a shaky laugh. I kept waiting for someone to choose me without me having to beg for it. Silence sat between us, heavy and intimate in a way that scared me more now than it did before, because now there was no marriage to hide behind, no excuse that said this is impossible. Now it was just choice and consequence. I don't know what happens next, I admitted. Lena nodded. Neither do I. But I know what shouldn't happen next. I held her gaze, and the space between us felt like a fault line. I didn't reach out. I didn't touch her. I forced my body to stay still, because I needed at least one thing in my life right now that wasn't fueled by impulse. Lena stood, clearing her throat. I'm going to pack. Okay, I said, and it sounded like surrender. That night, I heard her suitcase zipper, heard drawers open and close, heard the soft thud of folded clothes. Each sound was a quiet goodbye. When she came downstairs with her bag, she paused at the bottom step, looking at the living room like it held a memory she couldn't carry. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I shook my head, but I couldn't find a clean answer. I am too. She stepped forward and placed her hand against my chest, just for a second, a light pressure like she was imprinting herself onto the place where my heart had been bruised. Then she pulled her hand away before it could become a promise. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, I managed. And then she was gone, the front door clicking softly behind her, leaving me alone with the first real consequence. The house was empty, and there was no one left to distract me from what it meant. Emily didn't call. She didn't text. Weeks went by with nothing but lawyer emails and logistical questions delivered in sterile language: asset list, mortgage, retirement accounts, division of property. The coldness of it was almost worse than anger, because anger at least means the person is still emotionally present. This was administration. This was a life being dismantled by forms. I kept expecting the family to find out in some dramatic way, like a confrontation at a holiday dinner, like a scream in the driveway, like someone showing up on my porch demanding answers. But fallout doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it spreads like ink in water, quiet, unavoidable, staining everything it touches. It started with Emily's mother. She called on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting at my desk pretending to focus. Her name on my phone made my stomach drop. I answered anyway. Hello? Her voice was tight, controlled. Jake. Hi, I said, throat dry. A pause. Then, what did you do? I exhaled slowly. Emily talked to you. She didn't say much, her mother snapped. She just said you're separating and that you crossed a line. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's complicated. I don't care if it's complicated, she said. She's my daughter. And she was my wife, I replied, quieter than I meant. Her mother went silent for a moment, then said something that landed like a slap. Was it Lena? My pulse jumped. Who told you that? She didn't, her mother said. But I know my girls, and I know what kind of mess would make Emily this cold. I swallowed hard. Nothing happened the way you're imagining. A harsh laugh. So something happened. I didn't answer, Because silence was the closest thing to honesty I could give without turning my life into a courtroom. Her voice sharpened. Where is she? Is she with you? No, I said quickly. Lena left. She's not here. Her mother's breath hitched, and for a second I heard something underneath the anger. Fear. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? I stared at the wall, heart pounding. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But you did, she snapped. And now my daughters won't speak. Emily won't eat. Lena won't answer my calls. Do you understand the damage? My mouth went dry. Emily checked out long before Lena ever walked into this house. Her mother's voice turned icy. Don't you dare blame my daughter for your choices. I clenched my jaw. I'm not blaming her. I'm saying it wasn't sudden. It wasn't a betrayal out of nowhere. It was a collapse that had been happening for years. Silence. Then her mother said, colder than before, You're not welcome at any family event again. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so final, so clean, like she was stamping my forehead with a word and moving on. I understand, I said quietly. The call ended without goodbye. After that, the messages started. Emily's brother texted me something short and ugly. A cousin I barely knew sent a paragraph about loyalty and disgust. People who had smiled at me across dinner tables now treated me like a contagion. None of them asked what the marriage had been like. None of them asked how long the distance had lasted. They just picked a side, because sides are easier than truth. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just absorbed it, because maybe I deserved some of it. Maybe consequence is what happens when you let loneliness drive the car. Some nights, I stared at my phone willing Lena to text me, and then hated myself for it, because even wanting comfort from her felt like stealing again. One evening, she finally did. A single message. Are you okay? I stared at it for a long time, then typed, I don't know. Her reply came a minute later. Me neither. That was all. But it was enough to make my chest ache, because it reminded me that she was suffering too, and that whatever "why wait" had meant in the moment, the real cost was what came after, when everyone had time to name us as villains. The divorce meeting wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears across a conference table. Just paperwork, neutral voices, and two people who had already emotionally separated months before they made it legal. Emily sat across from me in a gray blazer I'd seen her wear to presentations when she wanted to look untouchable. It suited her. She didn't look broken. She looked contained. We signed where we were told to sign, initialed where we were told to initial. Years of shared mornings, holidays, inside jokes, and silent resentment reduced to black ink and tidy paragraphs. When it was over, the lawyer stepped out to make copies, leaving us alone in the sterile room. It was the first time we'd been alone since that kitchen argument. Emily stared at the table for a long moment before speaking. I keep replaying it, she said quietly. Replaying what? I asked. When I stopped touching you, she answered, not looking up. I didn't notice when it happened. It just faded. And I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I'd fix it when work slowed down, when I felt better, when I wasn't so tired. I swallowed. Tomorrow. She gave a faint, humorless smile. Yeah, tomorrow. Silence sat between us, but it wasn't hostile. It was honest. I didn't mean to make you feel invisible, she continued. I just didn't know how to want anything anymore. Not you, not work, not myself. Her words landed softer than I expected. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I was embarrassed, she admitted. You were still trying. You were still reaching, and I had nothing to give back, so I avoided it. I nodded slowly. That was the part that hurt most. Not cruelty. Avoidance. Emily finally looked at me. Did you love her? The question wasn't sharp. It was tired. I hesitated, because honesty had already cost us so much. I don't know, I said carefully. I loved feeling seen. I loved not feeling small. I loved that she looked at me like I mattered. Emily flinched, but she didn't lash out. I used to look at you like that. I know, I said. Another silence. I don't hate you, she said finally. I thought I would, but I don't. I think we both let it die quietly. Her words felt like a verdict. I never wanted to hurt you, I said. I know, she replied. But intention doesn't erase impact. That line would stay with me long after. The lawyer came back in. Papers were handed over. Final copies exchanged. We stood at the same time, awkward, unsure if there was a correct way to end something that once meant everything. Goodbye, Jake, she said. Goodbye, Emily. No hug, no handshake, just distance that had finally been named. When I stepped outside into the parking lot, the air felt heavier than I expected. Not because I wanted to run after her, but because endings, even necessary ones, carry weight. My phone buzzed as I got into my car. A message from Lena. How did it go? I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. It's done. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, I'm sorry. I sat there in the quiet car and realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't her victory. This wasn't my freedom parade. This was simply the consequence of 2 people who stopped choosing each other. I typed back, "Can we talk?" Her response came slower this time. Yes. We met at the same overlook where everything had shifted months earlier. The sky was overcast this time, gray instead of gold. No cinematic sunset, no romantic lighting, just wind and the faint smell of rain. Lena stood by the railing, hands tucked into her jacket sleeves. She looked thinner, tired, not dramatic, just worn in a way that comes from carrying guilt too long. It's official? She asked when I stepped beside her. Yeah, I said. It's official. She nodded slowly, staring at the water below. How is she? Sad, I answered, but not shocked. Lena winced. Does she still hate me? I hesitated. She's hurt. I think she'll be hurt for a long time. The wind lifted her hair, and she closed her eyes for a second like she needed strength. I never wanted to be the wedge, she whispered. You weren't the wedge, I said. You were the mirror. She looked at me sharply. I was already lonely, I continued, already fading. You just made it impossible to ignore. Lena swallowed. That doesn't make it clean. No, I agreed. It doesn't. We stood there in silence for a while, letting the reality settle between us. No heat, no charged electricity, just 2 people aware of the damage behind them. I have to ask you something, she said finally. Okay. If I hadn't said, why wait, would you still be married? The question hung in the air like fog. I thought about the nights in the dark, the repeated, maybe tomorrow, the way I had been shrinking without even realizing it. Yes, I said honestly, I would still be married. Her shoulders sagged slightly. But I would still be lonely, I added, and I would still be pretending. She looked up at me, searching for something in my face. I don't want to be your rebound, she said quietly. I don't want to be the girl who got you because your marriage failed. You didn't get me, I said. You didn't win anything. Then what are we? She asked. That was the hardest part. I looked out over the water. I don't know yet, I admitted. Right now, we're 2 people who survived something messy. Lena nodded slowly. I've been terrified that if we try, it'll feel like we built something on top of wreckage. Maybe we did, I said, but wreckage doesn't mean there wasn't truth in it. She studied me carefully. Do you choose me because I was there? Or because you would choose me even if none of this had happened? The question was sharp, clean. I stepped closer, but not enough to touch her. I choose you, I said slowly, because you see me, not because you were available, not because you were convenient, because when everything felt dead, you made me feel alive, and I don't think that's small. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I need time, she said. I know. I need to know that if we ever try this, it's not rebellion. It's not comfort. It's not filling silence. I nodded. Then we take time. The wind picked up, cold against my face. Why wait? She asked softly, almost like she was testing the phrase again. I smiled faintly. Because this time, waiting means choosing carefully. She stepped forward then and rested her forehead briefly against my chest. Not a kiss, not possession, just connection. Then she pulled back. We do this right, she said. Or not at all, I agreed. We didn't leave holding hands. We didn't promise forever. We just stood there a moment longer, aware that why wait had once meant impulse, but now it meant intention. Driving home, I realized something that took months to understand. The real damage wasn't the whisper in the kitchen. It was the years of maybe tomorrow that came before it. The real lesson wasn't about temptation. It was about neglect. Emily and I hadn't exploded. We had evaporated. Lena didn't destroy my marriage. She exposed what was already hollow. And standing in that quiet house later that night, alone but not shrinking, I understood the final truth. Waiting only works when both people are walking toward tomorrow. If one of you has already stopped moving, maybe tomorrow is just a softer way of saying never. And this time, I wasn't willing to wait for never again.